Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Hot Mic Show. I'm Bill Whittle, and we're talking about narcissistic idiot Piers Morgan and his tweet where he basically says we need to amend the amendments, re-amend them, he says, the First and Second Amendments. And we have, of course, a very high reason for doing that. And the reason is to ban Nazis and to reduce gun deaths. Now, with us on the phone is Freedom's friend, Jan Morgan. Same last name as Pierce, but that's no reason to be mean, folks. Jan is at her shooting range right now. And so if you hear concussive noises during the rest of the show, just think of them as little exclamation marks of freedom. So we covered in the beginning Piers's amendment thing, and we covered in his humble opinion and all the rest of it. You know, Jan, quickly, because this is ground that we've all tread here pretty well, I would say. What would you say to Piers in terms of actual evidence when he says banning guns, what does he say, reduce gun deaths because you're going to break down the Second Amendment? It seems to me that gun bans are strictly enforced in places like Chicago, and the murder rate is insane. And places like, Plano, Texas, or Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, every single person's got probably 20 firearms in their house, and those areas seem to be relatively murder-free. What would you say to Piers's idea about that?
Well, I would say that let's skip even current events and let's look at history, and that Piers needs to get a history lesson, because in the 20th century, over 170 million people have been annihilated by their own governments after being disarmed. So
that's right.
That disarming the citizenry eventually can lead to annihilation. History has proven that. And if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. You've got, and in every case, Bill, of course, you and I know this, but in every single case, it always began with the little steps that, like Piers is suggesting, more regulations. Gun registry. Piers would be perfectly comfortable with a gun registry. Well, in the process of annihilation that has occurred in the 20th century, in every case, the process was the same. Started with gun registration of firearms. Registration of firearms eventually always led to confiscation of firearms, which eventually always led to annihilation. Now, no, I don't expect that's going to happen in America. And the reason it's not is because the citizens of this country understand history, and we have our Second Amendment, and we're not going to continue to allow our government to regulate. In fact, if you know me, Bill, you know that I am constantly fighting to not just hold the line. It seems like in spite of all the NRA's great efforts, we're still just holding the line. It's like everything we can do to stop these constant infringements. I would like for us to move beyond that and actually push past the line and start repealing and peeling away some of the 20-plus thousand gun control laws in the books in this country. That's my goal. So Piers is, I would love a chance to debate the guy. I really would. He is absolutely
I don't think
world history.
I don't think that's something he would. I don't think that's something he would enjoy too much. And by the way, it is just so absolutely epic to hear you talking about gun rights and Second Amendment rights, and just hearing gunshots going off in the distance. Just kind of cool. So look, here's the thing. We know that the banning gun control thing, and that we've been up and down this road. But the one thing I think that's interesting is here's a guy who's a journalist who's calling for the First Amendment as well to be amended, to be restricted. And basically what he's saying is we ought to amend the First Amendment so that we can ban Nazis. Now, Jan, I've looked a little bit at history, and I've seen the attempts to ban alcohol. We've tried to ban the war on drugs. They've tried to ban prostitution. They've tried to ban a lot of things. They don't seem to be terribly successful. But look, here's the thing about the banning Nazis things, right? Jan, I think Piers Morgan has totalitarian, authoritarian instincts. I think he's in favor of a very powerful centralized government, and therefore I think he's a dangerous collectivist, and therefore Piers Morgan is pretty clearly a Nazi, and therefore Piers Morgan needs to be banned from television and radio.
Absolutely agree, but I would say he doesn't just have instincts. I think that Piers Morgan has totalitarian wet dreams every night. I'm sorry, and that may not be appropriate for this time of day TV, but that's where he is. And he brought this whole thing up again, ironically, after the situation that we had this weekend, the horrible tragedy that we had, and he attacked gun rights again. And here, in that situation, there were no firearms-related deaths or injuries. None.
No.
And in fact, there was a well-armed militia present. There was a well-armed militia present there, and there were no guns drawn on people. No one was shot accidentally or on purpose. So to him bringing the whole gun rights debate back to the forefront over what happened this weekend is also just out of place and typical. And, the guy, I don't know how he has any credibility left anymore at all. But I'm ready to just stomp it in the ground and let's end his gun control rants once and for all.
Yeah, Jen, no, let me just pick it up here. This story that I'm about to tell you very briefly is the first time I can ever remember. I was very young. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. It's the first time I ever remember thinking, this is an adult thought that I'm having here. This is something important. And what was happening was my dad had gotten to Europe in the last week of World War II. He never saw combat or anything, but we grew up on shows like Combat and all of this World War II stuff. And my father went to fight the Nazis. I hate the damn Nazis. He hated them too. So you can imagine my surprise when I was 7 years old or 8 or something like that. And the news reports were that the Nazis were marching in Skokie, Illinois, that they'd petitioned to march down the streets of that city and that they'd won their legal battle to do so, and that the Nazis and the swastika were just waving down the street in small town America. And I thought my dad was going to say, well, we need to absolutely get the tanks out and just crush these people, put them away, lock them up. He said, no, Billy, you gotta let them do it. And I was flabbergasted. I was just gobsmacked. I said, why? Why? He said, because who decides? Who decides what's legal and not? Who decides what's hate speech and not? Who decides? Who decides? If you have one person deciding what can be said and not said, then it's over. You have to allow these repugnant, repulsive things to come. That's the price of free speech, the price of being able to speak your mind and think what you want to think. That is not free. It's a freedom, but it's not free. That freedom costs us in terms of hearing either incredibly bigoted, incredibly stupid, incredibly vile, incredibly indecent, pornographic, whatever. All of these viewpoints come with this freedom, and that's the price tag.
Yes. And when I say, though, that I want these rants to end once and for all, I don't mean squashing his free speech. What I mean is,
of course not,
that enough people in the world will see the truth. As Dana Lash held her fist up and said, the clenched fists of truth, and we have the facts on our side. And eventually, as more people die as a result of violence because they are not armed and don't have a way to defend themselves, I think you're going to see more people moving over to our side. I know that we have had record numbers of people. The more the government tries to control gun rights, the more people are fearful of losing those rights, and they're getting armed and trained. That's what Obama did for America, and I'm grateful to that. The more he tried to talk about gun control, the more American citizens started saying, you know what, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my gun rights. I'm going to get armed and trained. So when people like Piers talk, and then we can stand up to him with facts, and they see the truth, I think we are going to see, and we can thank Piers for that, more people are going to come to the realization that an armed America is a free America. Most armed, most free, always.
Yep. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a Second Amendment advocate with gunshots in the background to prove it, making a very cogent and sensible defense of the First Amendment. Thank you so much for joining us, Jan. You can find her at janmorganmedia.com. It's a pleasure having you here today. I just want to wrap with a very quick thought here. There is a philosopher, and he was kind of a loathsome guy, but nevertheless, I think he made a really interesting point. A guy was a real Marxist, part of the Frankfurt School. His name's Erich Fromm. He was a psychologist. And Erich Fromm wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. Not Escape to Freedom, Escape from Freedom. And his basic premise was, after years of study, and I think this has been backed up many times, he found out that most people, if left alone, if you basically took away their societal support structures, if you just got people alone and asked them, he said most people don't really want to be free. Most people, if you gave them a choice, would you rather be free or would you rather have security? Would you like to be able to live anywhere you want to, or would you like to have guaranteed rent for the rest of your life? These kind of questions. Fromm was the first person to really state that many people, most people in the world, certainly, I don't think in this country, but most people are afraid of freedom. Freedom is not easy. Freedom's not easy at all. Freedom is hard work, and it's scary. It's scary to not know where the next rent check is going to come from when you're tight on money. It's scary. And it's work, too, you know, doing your laundry and all of these other things that you have to do on a daily basis. Your responsibility. You're an adult. It's not being done by somebody else. But, you know, people that would trade their security, that would trade their liberty, rather, in exchange for security, as Franklin said, deserve neither liberty or security. And people who have no personal liberty, but who are clothed and fed and housed by somebody else, well, there's a word for people like that, and that word is slaves. And Piers Morgan is an example of what is left in Britain when all of the people who were willing to take a chance on freedom left. When the people in Britain for the last couple of hundred years, including virtually all of our founding fathers, by the way, they simply decided they were going to take a chance. They decided they were adult enough and preferred the freedom to the security, so they risked their lives, came here, started this revolution. It's kept 320 million of us now free for 228 years or something like that, and I don't expect to let it end on my watch, and I know you don't either. That's the Hot Mic Show for today. I'm Bill Whittle. We'll be back on Monday. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you here next time right on NRATV.